Parents take sister on vacation instead of me. Later on, she ruined family vacation and got arrested. Now my parents finally realize her true colors. I 23F have a younger sister, Lisa 18F, who I believe is the true incarnation of evil on earth. I have tried my best to convince my parents over the years to see the truth, but they never believed me, at least until now. For context, my parents and I have always had a somewhat strained relationship, mainly because of Lisa. My parents absolutely adore her because my mother had a miscarriage and she lost the baby, which deeply affected her. Lisa, born a few years later, was regarded as their miracle child, a beacon of hope and joy that healed the pain of their previous loss. My parents showered her with affection and attention, turning her into the center of our family universe. Now let me be clear, I loved my younger sister when we were children. It's just that I slowly started realizing that Lisa had an incredible talent for manipulation that none of my family members were able to grasp. She knew how to twist the story in her favor, and she was a master at playing the victim card. Once on my birthday, I got this amazing antique pocket watch from our grandparents. I was so happy with it, as my grandmother told me that it was a family heirloom. But Lisa, well, she was clearly jealous and kept asking if I could share it with her. I said no because it was a gift for me on my birthday. She tried to persuade our parents, but since it was from our grandparents, they couldn't do much that night. Lisa, who knew I was terrified of spiders, placed a house spider inside my pillowcase, ensuring I would discover it when I went to bed. I awoke to the horrifying sensation of a spider crawling over my skin and started screaming. My parents rushed to my room concerned. Lisa acted all surprised and caring, but later she admitted to me with a creepy grin when we were alone that she put the spider there to teach me a lesson. I was shocked by how casually she confessed without any remorse. Another time I remember when I had a crush on my classmate Mark, and I finally had the courage to invite him over to watch a movie with me. I was feeling all giddy and excited, and had carefully picked out a dress to impress him. But as soon as Mark arrived at our house, Lisa deliberately spilled a glass of juice all over my dress and started laughing at me. I was more mortified and had to change, all while trying to hide my embarrassment. As if that wasn't enough, Lisa started telling Mark embarrassing stories from my childhood, making me feel utterly humiliated. She didn't leave us both alone the entire time we watched the movie. When Mark was about to leave, Lisa smirked and told him that he could do much better than me. Mark, who had been uncomfortable the entire time, left in a hurry. I just couldn't believe how cruel and cunning my younger sister could be. Over the years, I told my parents about her antics several times, but they always chalked it up to her being young and naive. They just couldn't see her for who she really was. Whenever I complained, they just dismissed me and thought of me as the troublemaker in the family. So I eventually stopped speaking up about her. Lisa continued being their favorite child, while I, always straightforward, often felt like the outsider in my own family. I focused on my studies and managed to get into a good college. This gave me a chance to move out of our house and have a better life in college. However, every time I returned home during breaks, Lisa made it abundantly clear that she despised having me back in the house. She would deliberately ignore me, refusing to engage in even the most basic of conversations. During family meals, she would avoid sitting next to me or interrupt me if I was talking to our parents. Her constant need to undermine my presence was evidence that she despised the idea of me being around and was determined to make my visits as uncomfortable as possible. Lisa even used to mess with my stuff, pretending that she needed to borrow things, but would often damage them or lose them. Instead, my parents did nothing when I tried to complain, and instead urged us to get along with each other. As a result, I began avoiding coming home during breaks. I would come up with excuses to spend my breaks with my college friends' families instead. Truth be told, my parents didn't mind as much and chalked it up to me being independent and wanting to enjoy some time away from home. When Lisa graduated from high school, she didn't have the grades for college, so she settled for community college instead. This meant that she never had to move out of our parents' place. These days, I am working at a multinational corporation in San Francisco, and I genuinely enjoy my job. I sometimes stay in touch with my parents, but I rarely visit back home. I don't maintain any contact with Lisa whatsoever. Now, coming on to the story, My father recently had a near-fatal heart attack. Fortunately, he survived by some miracle and was rushed to a hospital when my mother called to tell me about it. I immediately booked my tickets and flew back home to be there for them. The doctors prescribed numerous medications for my father and strongly advised him to start working out since being discharged. My father has expressed spending more time with us as a family and told me how lucky he was to be saved from the brink of death. I understood where my dad was coming from, so I continued spending a few days at our house. My job has the option to work remotely, so it was no problem. However, I noticed that Lisa was deeply agitated that I was back. I tried my best to avoid her because we were both older now, and I didn't want to argue after our dad's heart attack. One morning during breakfast, my father suggested that we all go on a family vacation as it had been a long time since we all went somewhere together. Initially, I had my reservations, but knowing how important it was to my dad, I agreed. As for Lisa, well, she wasn't thrilled about it, but she had no choice but to go along with the plan. My father made all the arrangements for our flights and accommodations. I had planned my leave from work in advance and informed my colleagues not to contact me during this time, as I genuinely wanted to enjoy quality time with our parents. However, when we arrived at the airport, I found out that my flight ticket had been cancelled. I exchanged puzzled looks with my father, who kept insisting that he had booked and paid for my ticket. When we checked further, it turned out that out of the 4 tickets, the one with my name on it in particular had been mysteriously cancelled. As I stood there trying to comprehend the situation, I looked over at Lisa. She had a sly smile on her face as she stared at me. It was a look I had seen so many times before, the same expression she wore when she had successfully pulled off one of her manipulative tricks. I realized at that moment that she was the one who had cancelled my ticket, probably from my father's computer. I started yelling at her as she continued to stand there smiling at me. I pointed out to my parents that it was Lisa's doing, as she never wanted me to go on this family vacation in the first place. Instead of believing me, my mother immediately dismissed my claim, saying your sister would never do something like that. She went on to tell me that I should stop being jealous of my younger sister, and that it was just a freak accident, that my ticket had been cancelled. My father also tried to justify that this might have been an airline mistake, and I should not blame it on my sister. I was utterly frustrated that my parents couldn't fathom that their beloved miracle child would be behind such a deception. At this point, there was nothing that I could do. My ticket was already cancelled, and there were no other flights for that day, while it was possible for me to catch a flight the next day. I didn't relish the idea of returning home, booking a new flight, and traveling alone. After all, this was supposed to be a family trip. I was also dreading Shar in a room with Lisa during this trip. I had hoped that she had matured over the years, but if she was behind the cancellation of my flight ticket, I couldn't help but wonder what other scheme she might have in store to make my trip miserable. My father was initially hesitant, suggesting they could all go back home and plan a new trip later. But he then started talking about how it had been ages since he went on a vacation. My mother agreed, telling me that I always travel a lot for work, so I wasn't going to miss out on much on this trip if I didn't go. Their comments really got to me. It felt like they wanted me to insist they continue to go on this vacation without me. I told them that they were welcome to continue with their vacation if they wanted, and they readily agreed, although I didn't want the money they had spent on the tickets and rooms to go to waste. I was sad that they didn't care whether I joined them or not. It became clear that they didn't mind going on this family vacation as a family of 3. So there I was, standing alone at the airport as my parents and Lisa headed for their much anticipated vacation. I decided to return to my home in San Francisco, not wanting to spend a day further alone in our family house. I tried my best to put the incident behind me and focused on enjoying the rest of my leave that I had already taken from my work. I reconnected with old friends and spent my days engrossed in books, turning my break into a solo station. During the trip, my parents would sometimes video call me, and I could see how much they were enjoying the trip without me. It was like my absence didn't really affect their trip in any way. Although I wasn't too heartbroken about missing the vacation, I couldn't help feeling excluded. It was yet another reminder of the favoritism that had always existed in our family. I hoped that someday they would see through Lisa's true nature and I guess my wish finally came true a few days into their vacation. I woke up to several missed calls from my mother, worried that my father's health might have taken a sudden downturn. I immediately called her back. Thankfully, she picked up, but she sounded extremely distressed. I asked her if everything was okay, and she went on to explain that something deeply troubling had happened. Apparently, my parents had noticed that my father's essential heart medications were disappearing day by day. It was an alarming situation, as my father couldn't afford to miss his medication given his fragile health. They were in a foreign country and didn't know if the same medicine would be available outside of us. They were genuinely concerned about the missing pills and searched their room everywhere. In vain, my mother had gone to Lisa's hotel room, which was adjacent to theirs, to borrow some sunscreen. While Lisa was out, to her utter shock and dismay, she discovered all the missing medicines carefully tucked away inside Lisa's bedside table. It was a chilling revelation, and she immediately called for my father. He rushed in and found all his medication that had gone missing the last few days. I guess this is when the truth dawned on them that their beloved daughter, the so-called miracle child, had been intentionally jeopardizing my father's health and putting him at great risk. My mother's voice quivered as she asked if they should confront Lisa about this. I asked her to not speak to Lisa about this until they were back home. They needed to gather their thoughts, emotions, and evidence to face Lisa with the undeniable truth. I knew that speaking to Lisa now would be futile, as she was a master manipulator and would likely concoct excuses to evade responsibility. However, something unexpected must have transpired, that KN and my parents must have confronted her about it. I received a late-night call from my father, his voice trembling as he informed me that Lisa was in jail. I was taken aback. He recounted Lisa had a full-blown tantrum when they asked her about the medications, throwing objects and shouting insults. Her rage was targeted primarily at my father, accusing him of booking a ticket for me when he should have never allowed me on their family vacation.